Total War Warhammer 40K has finally revealed its best look yet at actual gameplay, and after months of interviews, concept art, and those early reveals, now we're finally starting to get a clearer picture of what the game actually looks like in action, and I've got to say it looks incredible. The showcases and reveals this time weren't especially long though, but it did reveal a few interesting facts and more importantly gameplay. We got our first look at how battles flow, how the cover works, a better understanding of the campaign structure, and confirmation that Armageddon is where we begin our journey into the grim darkness of the far-flung future. So let's break down the biggest things we've learned and why Total War Warhammer 40K is starting to look much bigger than many originally expected. One of the main takeaways from this reveal wasn't even the gameplay. It was actually that we got a look at where Total War Warhammer 40K will begin. Creative Assembly, the developers, confirmed that we will start our journey with a story-driven onboarding campaign set during the Battle for Armageddon. If you don't know, this is one of the most iconic conflicts in the entire 40k universe, and if you spent any time around 40k, you've probably heard the name before. Armageddon is basically a setting for one of the Imperium's largest wars, and is synonymous with the endless conflict between humanity and the orcs. Meanwhile, for tabletop, it kind of refers at least recently to the Warhammer 40k Armageddon box set, which is new to the 11th edition of the game that just recently came out. What's interesting though is that this isn't being treated as a tutorial section of the game strictly. The devs described it as a narrative-driven campaign designed to introduce both new Total War players and newcomers to the 40k setting, while still featuring some of the franchise's biggest characters for the fans. We got confirmation that Commissar Yarrick will be involved, alongside his legendary rival, Ghazghkull Thraka. And it's a pretty cool place to start. The scale, tone, and craziness of Warhammer 40k is always something that's interesting to see how new games present the setting. And there probably isn't many better examples than a planet that's fighting for its own survival against a literal, massive, humongous orc invasion. And what caught our attention after that is how the devs said that Armageddon's just the start. They said Armageddon is certainly not where we're stopping, and this paints a bigger picture of how large the overall campaign and gameplay structure will be. It doesn't sound like this campaign is just focused around a single world or even system. Basically, Armageddon is an opening chapter before the players can then expand out into a proper campaign, and it's essentially a galactic level war. This is where things start to get really interesting and cool, because they talked about the campaign map and how it's more ambitious and generally huge this time around. We have talked about this before on the channel with how the game is taking place across multiple planets and star systems, but one of the things the developers keep coming back to is the scale of it. Total War has always been a series with big, huge campaigns, both on the overworld map and the battles when you're actually commanding the troops on the field. But with Warhammer 40k, they're actually breaking that mold a bit and pushing it further. So unlike the current game with simple provinces and regions, 40k has entire star systems where you decide which planets you want to invade, which worlds are worth fighting for, and what strategic advantage each world might provide to your chosen faction. The devs also gave a few examples of this. A more industrialized or civilized world might provide something like better vehicle production, while resource-rich planets could provide benefits that help certain units or armies grow faster. They also talked about different planet types, including hive worlds, mining worlds, and frontier worlds, and all of these will have different environmental biomes and physical looks, and maps for the actual battles on them. The cool thing is they're aiming to create a system that combines the world's different types and environments together to generate a huge variety of different maps. This means if you have something like, say, a mining world, they won't all look the same. You might end up with one being a frozen mining colony, another being a desert mining world, or even a heavily industrialized wasteland. And while we only got a few brief glimpses of it, some of those planetary environments are looking pretty awesome already. The hive worlds in particular capture something that 40k is kind of known for, and they describe them as having enormous cathedral-like structures that stretch into the clouds, and entire planetary surfaces covered in urban development. But the devs repeatedly mentioned player choice, narrative decisions, and a focus on replayability. They talked about how your decisions can influence the direction of a campaign, the rewards you receive, and even how certain story elements play out. So while we're still waiting to see exactly how these things work together and pan out, it sounds like they want each campaign to feel unique, thus pushing replayability. I always thought replayability in Total War games was good anyway, so maybe this will just take it up another notch. Of course, this all sounds good on paper, but it is them hyping the game up and doing their marketing. But I think the real question many of us had was what the battles themselves would actually look like. And after this, we finally got a proper look at gameplay, and we're starting to see how good it looks. This is particularly interesting because Total War generally works well in a sort of fantasy setting or fantasy historic setting. But a full-on grimdark sci-fi setting isn't an easy transition. They can't just use previous assets and expect it to work in 40K's setting. It really is a big difference. And after watching the latest gameplay, we're starting to see how Creative Assembly are going to tackle it all. The first thing that immediately stood out is that there's a cover system. Unlike the previous Total War games where the terrain more or less gave you more passive benefits to combat, like shooting on the high ground or funneling enemies through water, in this you can see the map is connected to your unit's placement. We can see Imperial Guards spreading themselves across defensive structures and cover. They're making use of barricades, ruins, fortifications, and other things rather than standing in a nice neat formation. UI also shows that the cover provides benefits like ranged resistance, evasion, and suppression resistance, and this sounds small, but if you play Total War games, you know the importance of these things in a proper battle. What we also like is that when you think of Imperial Guard holding the line against an Orc assault, you kind of imagine trenches, defensive encampments, artillery, desperate last stands behind crumbled pieces of cover, and this is exactly the kind of thing that's coming to life here. The second thing that stands out is the destruction. Buildings are collapsible on these maps, they provide new cover as they fall to the ground, explosions can send enemies flying, and defensive positions appear to be capable of being broken and blasted apart as well. So for melee factions like Orcs, it means that cover isn't permanent if you can work around it. Obviously, a strong defensive position is always good, but if your opponent brings enough long-ranged firepower, supposedly, those things could end up leaving your units vulnerable if they blast out your fortifications and cover. Plus, visually, everything looks very much 40k to me. I love the chonkiness of the Orc units as well. The constant artillery strikes, the orbital bombardments, the waves of infantry pushing, it feels very fitting. And we even got a better look at some of the major and unique mechanics to 40k. Strategic reserves appear to play a major role, with units being called into battle after the fight's already started, rather than just dumping all of your units at the start of a map, or in Total War style, reinforcements coming from off of the map. We're still missing a lot of details on how this works, but it seems pretty cool because remember, Space Marines have those classic drop pods. Then other factions have their own versions of that, so it'll be really cool to see it all in action. I would say the biggest compliment we can give the gameplay so far is that it does look like Warhammer 40k, and that was a concern for a lot of people given this is a Total War game. The final piece of news is extremely exciting though because we're actually able to play the game before it's even launched. Creative Assembly, the developers, have officially opened signups for a closed beta which will be taking place later this year. Now, they haven't shared exactly what the content will be yet, how large the test will be, and what we'll get access to, but the fact that they're already starting public testing is very promising. Obviously, we're a long way from release and there are plenty of questions we need answering. We need to see the other factions, we need a much deeper look into the campaign, and more importantly, we need to know how performance will hold up during those massive battles. But looking at it as a whole right now, it's hard to come away not feeling positive and excited. But what do you think? Are you liking what Creative Assembly are showing so far? What factions do you plan to play first? And are you signing up for the closed beta? Tell me down below, and subscribe because we'll be back with more on this and your favorite games coming very, very soon. Here at Arix Gaming, we're two friends who love to play games. You have me, Paradise, as well as 26.
Our goal is to keep the videos as concise as possible by cutting out any of the fluff and focusing on what really matters with high quality videos.
So make sure you're subscribed down below for more videos on your favorite games coming very, very soon.